In this video, Jordan Peterson talks about a form of information that we receive and understand but might not be able to put in words.
That's all to say that there are modes of communication that provide us with information that we can't articulate, but that we still act as if that information is valid. And you might say, well, valid for what? What exactly is it doing? What is it representing? What kind of information is it offering? That's so compelling, and what's so interesting about it is the kind of information that we're talking about. That information is so compelling that you'll pay to expose yourself to it. You know, it's a rare lecture that you'll go to and have to pay for the lecture itself. I mean, you'll come to the university and you'll get your degree. But if you had your option on a Saturday afternoon, or a Saturday night, let's say, it's relatively unlikely that you would attend a lecture, and certainly even more unlikely that you would pay to attend one, but you'll certainly pay to go somewhere to dance to music. And you know, it's why that is not obvious. You know, you say, well, it's entertaining. It's like, yeah, it's entertaining, all right, but it's a lot more than that. And I think that dismissing things that are enjoyable as entertainment, which means they're sort of peripheral, they're unimportant in some sense, which is often what it's a real terrible habit of psychologists. So, for example, when Steven Pinker wrote his book, it's the book on language, and unfortunately I can't remember the name at the moment. He devoted one chapter at the end basically to nonverbal cultural forms, and he talked about them as epiphenomenal, fundamentally. You know, they're a byproduct. And I think that's deeply wrong. And I think that our culture actually grew out of dance and drama and music. And science came way, way later than that. And I was watching an old video today. It was of the Animals playing House of the Rising Sun in 1964. It's a pretty good video, and it's a great old song. I mean, they didn't write it. It's an old blues song, but it's a great old song, and they do a pretty good job of it. And the audience was full of girls, and they were screaming madly away. Now, it wasn't quite as bad as the Beatles, which was completely unbelievable. But it was still, you know, a fairly continual din of delighted shrieks. And, you know, I think that's extremely interesting because you'd never see that at a scientific conference. Well, it's strange, eh? Like, there isn't anything else that elicits that kind of response. Maybe sports to some minimal degree, but certainly nowhere near with the same amount of enthusiasm. And, you know, one of the things and I mean, that's been happening for a long time. It wasn't merely a phenomenon of the 60s. I mean, I suspect it's been happening ever since there's been wandering minstrels, and that's a very, very long time. And I suspect those wandering minstrels left many offspring behind them. You know, and what's interesting about that is, you know, I mean, obviously part of the reason that human beings can sing is because we've selected each other for that ability, right? I mean, there's something very attractive about someone who's artistically gifted. And the idea that women will, you know, do backflips for a singer is not necessarily any negative comment on their ability to evaluate what's important. It might be quite the reverse. So anyways, the point is there's lots of different ways that we can convey information. And you might say, well, it's only simple information that can be conveyed that way, and you have to convey the complex information in more formal forms, scientific and philosophical. But I think that's exactly backwards. I think we get to articulate the simple stuff first, which is only what you'd expect, right? Because when you're mastering something difficult, like the unfolding of being, the probability that you're going to get to the simple things first and the complicated things later is pretty much 100%. And I mean, different fields advance at different speeds, but the artists and the musicians get to the complex matters far before the scientists and the engineers. And it has to be that way. One of the deep things I learned from Jung was that, you know, as our knowledge expands out into the unknown, there are people operating at the periphery, and so they really have one foot in the unknown and one foot on dry land, so to speak. And some of them more in the water than others. And the ones who are almost submerged up to their neck, when they tell you what they're seeing, it has to be poetic and musical and artistic because it's so far beyond our capacity to articulate that we can't represent it in words. And so all that can happen is the artists can get a hold of it. And maybe the religious, the people who are prone to religious-like sentiments, which, at least experiences, which seems to be associated, by the way, with trait openness, to have the actual religious experience, rather than to be an adherent of the dogma, which is associated with low openness. So, for Jung, you know, it was the artists and the entrepreneurs, because they're the same people, who were at the forefront of the expansion of what we know into what is unknown. And I think you can see echoes of that in the way that cities are rejuvenated. You know, because what happens, you can certainly see this in Toronto, is that a part of the city that has some architectural or contextual interest but is badly run down starts to get, at some point, you know, the artistic people show up and they think, hey, you know, this is kind of cool. If we just did this to it, it would, you know, there'd be really something to it. And it usually doesn't hurt that the rents are low, because, of course, artists never have any money. So then they go in there and civilize the hell out of it, and, of course, they're renting, and that jacks up the property values. And then the people who are a little less open but kind of interested in art start flowing in behind them, and then soon the whole place is rejuvenated and expensive, and, of course, the artists have to go somewhere else. But it's a very interesting phenomena, because what's happening is that even in the cities, they're taking chaos and turning it into order, and that's what artists do. So now that's all to tell you that there are different ways of transmitting, representing, and transmitting information, and that you can incorporate the information without having any articulated notion of what you're doing. So, of course, that's the case, because otherwise you'd have to claim that you understand everything you do and can articulate it, and it's like, that's just wrong. You know, you have a theory of yourself, but it's not a very accurate theory, which is why you're always doing things that are strange as far as you're concerned, which is also extremely bizarre. It's like, who the hell are you if you can't even control your own behavior? You know, and what does it mean to control it, and what does it mean to not control it? These are very, very complex and strange issues.